Hello, 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 everybody. Happy, marvelous Monday. I hope that you all are well. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are having Q&A session. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been with you, and I have been receiving a lot of emails and text messages. And so today I'm going to answer questions that you have. I've covered so many topics over the past few weeks pertaining to landlord and tenant issues. And so I want to answer questions today. What questions do you have for me? For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, let me say thank you so much. I am Karissa Span. I am the landlord and tenant coach. This is what I do each and every Monday. I bring information. I share topics that helps landlords as well as tenants. The information that I share is not legal advice. However, I do answer questions. I give tips and advice based off of the industry's best practice as well as applicable laws. So if this is your first time tuning in, please let me know where you're watching from. If you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Let me know that you're here. Drop a hey girl, hey in the comment section. I want to acknowledge you. But before I go on, I do want to acknowledge some people who are here today. I want to say hello, Michelle Wilson. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good evening, beautiful. Hello, Kimberly Parker, who is always supporting and tuning in every Monday from Charleston, South Carolina. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Come on. Welcome to the party. Hello, Mr. Anthony Ricks. Thank you so much for tuning in, Mr. Ricks. I know that you are tuned in from Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm excited today. I'm excited to be with you. And this is what I'm going to do. The first Monday of each month, I'm going to do a Q&A session. What questions do you have for me? What topics would you like for me to cover? Right. And so I think that is a great way to start out our segment for the month, because I want to make sure that I'm bringing information that is along the lines of what you're trying to learn about. So today I am going to open the floor up. I know that some of you have been tuning in week after week, and so I want to give space and room for you to like I said, ask any questions that you have. I have viewers who are tuned in from Facebook, have viewers who are tuned in from YouTube. If the information you hear today is helpful, go ahead and like, tag, and share it. And again, this is what I do each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So today, I don't have a particular structure or format other than answering questions for landlords and tenants. So if you know someone who is a landlord or a tenant, go ahead and tag them if they have questions. I want to answer questions that you have today. So I'm going to start out because I have someone who is actually on FaceTime right now. They have questions pertaining to tenants who are trying to rent from landlords who are in the Section 8 program. And so I want to start out by answering that question because that's the first one that I received on today. And so the question is, if you're a tenant and you are just receiving your Section 8 voucher, how do you find good landlords? That's a great question. So this is someone who is in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. They want information for finding a good landlord to rent from. So here's the one thing that I always tell applicants and prospects who are participating in the voucher program. When you're looking for quality landlords, when you're looking for rental property, first of all, identify the neighborhood or the community that you would like to live in. Make sure that if you have a housing choice voucher, if you have a Section 8 voucher, make sure that you understand what the rent amount is for that particular community. Because in all communities, the voucher may or may not cover it. So you want to make sure that the rent is affordable or that the program will approve it. So that's number one. And when you're looking for a landlord to rent from, One of the things that I always do is recommend that participants in the program reach out to the housing specialist at that housing authority. Usually they have a list of landlords who are participating and have rental property available. That's number one. So you can start with the agency to see if there's a list. Reach out to maybe also the Department of Human Services for landlord listing. True story. I had a young lady who contacted me earlier this year from a list that I put myself on as a real estate agent about 5 years ago. And they did not update the list. And so people are still calling me from years ago. And so usually there's really a large um, there's really a large platform of landlords that are available if you reach out to government agencies. Also, one of the things that some tenants don't realize is that Craigslist usually, let me pause here. Craigslist does have listings for rental property that landlords have. So I would suggest Craigslist. I would also suggest Zillow. And those are free platforms that landlords use. I also would recommend GoSection8.com. GoSection8.com. Usually you can find landlords there. And then also you can just do a Google search in your area for rental property that's available. Just make sure that you recognize what the approved rent amount will be in that particular area. So here's why that's going to be important. And I just want to take my time on this. If you know that, for instance, you're a Section 8 tenant, right? And you're trying to rent a property. If you know that let's say you see a house online, maybe a 3-bedroom house, it's online, it's available for rent. And you know that the program will approve the rent amount in that particular jurisdiction. And you contact that landlord, you tell them, hey, I'm a tenant in the Section 8 program. I am interested in renting your property. If they say, oh, well, we don't participate in the Section 8 program, or, well, no, they're not going to approve it because of the rent amount. If you already know the criteria, if you already know the rent amount, then you won't be bamboozled or hoodwinked by a landlord who just will flat out refuse people who are in the Section 8 program. And that happens so frequently. This is why I do help landlords to understand that fair housing laws are in place and that they can be sued if they are violating fair housing laws. And so tenants, if you know your rights, if you know the guidelines, if you know the criteria, then usually when you're contacting these landlords trying to rent their property, you will already know whether or not the program will approve it or not. All right, so that's number one. Now, just going back to Craigslist, because remember I said I was going to pause or park at Craigslist. Although I do recommend Craigslist, please make sure that people you are contacting are legit. So if you find a rental property on Craigslist, and I still recommend Craigslist, although some people are scam artists and they rip people off. I recommend Craigslist because I do advertise my rental property, and I manage property. I have rental property. I manage rental property in multiple jurisdictions, and I still use Craigslist. So if you're using Craigslist and you see something of interest, go ahead and contact the person, the individual. Try to get as much information about the rental property as possible. Here's one of the things that I do recommend as a tenant. Okay. If you find a landlord on Craigslist with the rental property available, ask them if they can send you maybe a virtual tour, some pictures personally to your email. Because here's why you want to do that. Sometimes people who are scam artists, they're not going to go above and beyond to provide extra material just to email to you. So ask the person up front if they can send you a virtual tour, a video, some pictures of the rental property. You want to find out their first and last name. You want to make sure that they're a real person. And look the property up just to make sure that it is available. Sometimes just do a Google search of the rental property address. That's one of the things that I do recommend. That's one of the things that I use as a tool to help people understand how to sometimes spot red flags. All right, so I wanted to answer that question first because that was the first question that came in. I do have another question. Hello, Daphne. Thank you so much for tuning in. And let me just say thank you to all of my students who are watching. Please do share this information today. And again, this is more of Q&A. I want to answer questions that you have. So if you've previously watched my Facebook Live or my YouTube Live and you had questions from a previous segment, go ahead and drop it in the comments section so that I could address those today, because that's what this session is all about. As we are coming upon a new year, 2022, a lot of doors are going to be open for people to rent because of the eviction moratorium. And a lot of people are realizing and recognizing that, hey, if I don't pay my rent, I'm going to be evicted. So I do want to address some questions that I know that tenants have who have not paid rent for whatever reason. No judgment zone here. If you haven't paid your rent, that's your business. If you had the money and you didn't pay it, you didn't care enough to pay your rent, that's your business. I'm not here to judge you. What I am here to do is to provide information to possibly help you if you have gotten a court notice, if you think you're going to court, if you have an eviction on your record. You want to explain to your next landlord, okay, why you went through that situation. Write a letter explaining, dear Karissa Span, I'm interested in renting your property. I left my previous property because I had a loss of income. I was evicted because I lost my job or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Put it in writing and explain your situation. Some people will take a chance on people who have had a rough patch. Me personally, I'm a person who I have a heart for people, and so I will take a chance with somebody. Of course, after thoroughly conducting the background check, I am willing to take a chance on people because I recall a time where I needed a little help, and so I believe in giving back. And so that's one of the things that I do. And so if you are a tenant and you know that you have not had a good rental history, I would recommend, like I said, put it in writing, explain your situation. But if it is a behavior issue, then I would strongly recommend correcting the behavior. Here is an example. So I had a young lady, true story. She moved in 2021. Without going into detail about her situation, there was some sort of domestic violent situation, and she had to abruptly leave her previous place of residency. She needed a place to rent. I had a 2-bedroom home available. And so in that, I saw some red flags on her background check. And so I had a conversation with her because I wanted her to understand what I was looking for in a tenant, and also to explain expectations of her, and then I can answer questions so I could make sure that I was able to perform whatever expectations she have of me. So one of the things that I did in my interview, okay, because I interview tenants, I want people to know who I am. I want to know more about my tenants. And so I had a conversation with this young lady to let her know what we're looking for. And she promised me, oh, well, the situation I was in, it's over. I'm not going back to that. You won't have this problem at your rental property. I'll take care of your rental property like it's my own. I'll be the best tenant you've ever had. So I let her in, and I don't know what happened. I'm not even sure if she knows what happened, but it turns out she has started to become like this. And some of you who have been watching me, I talk about tenants from hell because it is real. Okay. I'm not bashing tenants. I promise you I'm not. I promise you I'm not. But it turns out she is evolving into this tenant from hell, meaning that her behavior is not becoming, she complains a lot. She complained even at the interview part. She complained, she badmouthed the previous landlord. She talked about the previous landlord so bad and so harsh. And although she had a domestic violence situation, which was what I thought was the reason why she had to abruptly move and find another place, but she badmouthed her previous landlord to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm not even sure if I want to take a chance on her. but I did it anyway. Here's why I'm sharing this. When you have a situation, when you have a negative past as a tenant, the one thing you do not want to do is start off your landlord and tenant relationship in a new lease talking about your previous landlord, because here's why. It's going to put a bad taste in that new landlord's mouth, and it's going to make people and people can judge you. You know, that's their right, that's their business. People are entitled to judge fruit, right? So I like to call it fruit inspecting. I will look at the behavior. I will look at the character. I will listen to the language that's coming from my tenants and applicants and prospects. And there usually is a clear line in terms of the type of person that individual is and will become, right? Because here's why that's important. I want landlords to hear me on this, okay? Sometimes you may not meet the real person. You may sometimes only meet a representative of who that person is. And so it is always, always in your best interest as a tenant to be clear, to be honest, and to be upfront about who you are. If the issue is you, go ahead and acknowledge, you know what, I had an issue because I had income challenges. I mismanaged my money. However, I overcame that obstacle by getting help, by getting training, by getting counseling. People don't necessarily care that you've had an issue. What they want to know is, has the problem been corrected? Has that issue been resolved, or is there going to be an issue for me? And that's what a lot of landlords are looking for. Um, and this is one of the things that I help landlords to understand, how to spot the red flags when it comes to new prospects, applicants, and new tenants that's moving into rental property. All right, so I'm going to pause because I do have some text messages that have come in. These are questions that I'm answering. And so today is all about answering questions. This is Q&A with Karissa. So if you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the comment section. I want to make sure that I'm answering as many questions as possible on today. So Kim, I see that you've tagged someone. Kim, do you have any questions from the any previous segments that I've discussed on my monthly Facebook and YouTube live? And also I see that some more people are tuning in from YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in. So guys, listen, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and do that today. Go ahead and click that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I'm live and when I am online. I have answers for questions that tenants have. Please do not be afraid to ask your questions. That's what this segment is all about today. Questions pertaining to landlord issues as well as tenant issues. That's what this segment is about today. All right, so I'm going to go to some text messages that have come in. Questions. Okay, so I have a question from a landlord, and the question is, Karissa, I have a tenant who has damaged the property. I've tried to be a good landlord as you suggest, but it's not working. I don't want to take this tenant to court. What should I do? That's a great question. So sometimes you can do good and end up getting the wrong results or getting bad results. What do you do? How do you handle it? Listen, one of the things that I commonly share is this. I share it so frequently. If you treat it like a business, it will pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, guess what? It's going to pay you like a hobby. And so if you're a landlord and you have a tenant, you're trying to work with the tenant, you've sent notification, you tried to work with them, and they're still damaging your rental property. At the end of the day, it is your rental property. It is still a business. So whether you own one rental property, you own 4, you own 12, 48, or 128, it is a business. And so if you have a tenant who is not cooperating with you, they're not allowing you to make repairs, they're damaging the property, then your best case scenario is to take that tenant to court. And I know that, sometimes because I have a heart for people, I try to work with people as much as possible. If you've had a conversation with the tenant and that still has not worked, go ahead, take them to court. And allow the judge, allow the court to decide the fate of whatever's going to happen, the destiny, whatever's going to take place in that situation. Now, if that tenant is participating in any type of housing assisted program, any subsidized housing program, contact that agency. Let that agency know, hey, listen, I have a tenant. This is the documentation. These are the pictures. I've been trying to work with this tenant and they are destroying my rental property. Usually, housing agencies, they don't want tenants evicted from the program. They get money and funding either from the state, the city, or from Congress. Okay. And usually their goal is to not terminate the tenants from the program. So usually, in many cases, the agency, the housing specialist, or the workers, they will have a conversation with the tenant to say, hey, your landlord contacted me regarding ABC XYZ. This is a violation of the program. And if you continue to do these things, you could be terminated. And it's usually when the agency will get involved that a change will come about. But on the flip side of it, because I've worked with several housing agencies, okay, I've worked about, I think, maybe 18 and a half years with housing agencies as housing specialists and different things and stuff like that. So sometimes if it is not on the heart of that housing specialist, they may or may not intervene. But I would definitely say if you have a tenant that's participating in a housing program, go ahead and contact the agency. If you're not able to get in contact with the housing specialist or the worker, contact the supervisor. So for me, I only deal with supervisors because that's who I work with when I was at the agency. So I don't necessarily start with the housing, the case manager or the housing specialist. I always go to the supervisors because they're my friends. So I do hope that answers the question that you had. All right. So Mache, you said here, from a landlord perspective, have you ever experienced a unique situation with a tenant that prompted you to add a new clause to your leasing agreement? That's a great question. And yes, ma'am, absolutely. Sometimes things change. Information change, laws change. People who watch my Facebook Live, my YouTube Live, they're getting more information. I'm adding value. And so maybe you hear something, you want to add something to your lease, and now you want to incorporate that. So when that happens, just depending on the jurisdiction, have a conversation with your tenant to say, hey, I either A, want to renew the lease, or you can renegotiate the lease and add an addendum to the lease. There is nothing wrong with it. It is not against the law. So that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. That's one of the things that I do strongly recommend. I recommend that landlords update their lease, even if they're not getting a rent increase, even if you're not asking for a rent increase. If it is at all possible, please update your lease annually. Even if it's no change, consider looking at things that you could improve upon. So look at the lease, understand the laws. Are any new laws in place that you could benefit from? Whereas you can maybe tweak the addendum that you have or add extra addendums, or maybe you want to incorporate an addendum, or you want to have lease language pertaining to, let's say, extermination. Because in your current or previous lease, maybe extermination was not explained. Who's responsible? When should tenants report that they have an issue? And if they don't report it, if it's the landlord's responsibility to pay for it, or if it's the tenant's responsibility to pay for it. And so obviously, if it's not in writing, if it's not in a contract, then you cannot enforce something that is not in place. And so I tell people this all the time. If it's not in writing, you cannot enforce it. I mean, sometimes common sense may not be so common to people, but if it's not in writing, that's what will hold up. That's what will stand up, rather, in the court of law. Common sense don't really matter. The judge will look at what is in writing. Oh, is it in the lease? Okay, well, let's look at the lease. Oh, it's not in the lease. Well, I just have to dismiss your case. And a lot of court cases have been dismissed because it's been nothing in writing. So that's a great question. And so today, this is a Q&A session. I'm answering questions for landlords as well as tenants. If you have a question, go ahead and drop it in the comment section. I do want to make sure that I address all of your questions today. So I've covered a couple of questions so far. Excuse me. And I'll continue to answer questions that you have. All right. So let me go to YouTube. I see a question that has come in from YouTube. This is from a landlord. This landlord wants to know if I would recommend that they allow a tenant to move in without paying the security deposit. Okay, so a landlord on YouTube is asking if I would recommend that they allow a tenant to move in without paying the security deposit. Here's what I have to say on that. Again, it's a business. So let's say you allow this tenant to move in without paying the security deposit. Okay. Let's say in month 9, the tenant window is broken. Now, let's just go worst case scenario. This tenant is laid off from their job. They don't have any income. They're barely paying the rent. Okay. They've been paying $15 a month towards the security deposit of, let's say, $2,000. Okay. So they lost their job, right? They can barely afford to pay the rent. There's a broken window. And this tenant says to you, oh, well, can you take it out my security deposit? Well, they haven't paid a security deposit. So come month 12, they still haven't paid you the full security deposit. There's a broken window. There are holes in the wall. The tenant doesn't know what happened. There are doors with holes in them. There are doors that are falling off the hinges. The face of the cabinet door is falling off the hinge. You don't know how burn marks ended up in the brand new carpet that you installed for that tenant to move in. And so now you have a laundry list of repairs that are escalating and increasing, and they're adding up, and it's not cheap. So at the point of this tenant getting ready to move out, usually if you collect a security deposit, you can legally withdraw or take money or deduct from the security deposit and any interest that has accumulated on the security deposit as long as that tenant has lived there. But if you have nothing in reserve, you have nothing that you can deduct from. And so now you have a rental property that's damaged because of tenant. You don't have security deposit money in place. And now you just kind of SOL, you just out of luck. So would I recommend allowing a tenant to move in without paying the security deposit? Me personally, absolutely not. What I would do, because I am resourceful, I recognize that sometimes people don't have the money. They don't have security deposit money to move in. Some people are low income. Some people are moderate income. Some people are working individuals and still just don't have the money for the security deposit. I get it. I understand. Life happens to the best of us. What I would do with my resourceful self is I would look for an agency that I could refer this tenant to get the security deposit. Here's what I do for every applicant, and I manage hundreds of rental property. When I get a tenant who applies for any of my rental property, and I manage property in multiple jurisdictions, at the point that I approve their application or my staff or someone approves the application or the background check, I'll send an approval letter. Hey, congratulations. You've been approved to rent our 2-bedroom condo, our 3-bedroom townhouse, our 4-bedroom single family home, and blah, blah, blah. I'll tell them how much the rent is. The contract rent is $3,200 a month. The security deposit is $6,400 or whatever the security deposit is. I will begin to look for agencies in that jurisdiction, and I will provide them with a list of places that are available to assist them with paying the security deposit. Why would I do that? Can anybody tell me why I would do that? Does anybody know why I would do that? Can you put it in the comment section for me? Why do you think I do that for every applicant that's approved? I just want to see your feedback before I go into explaining why. And again, this session is Q&A. So if you have questions, drop it in the comment section. I'm going to answer all the questions that come in today from landlords as well as tenants. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I'm answering questions today. So please do not be afraid to ask questions today. So can anybody tell me, why do you think I do that? Why do you think that I provide the resources for my tenants when they are approved? Any landlords? Are there any landlords here? Because I want to open this up, and I want people to understand the ins and the outs, the whys to the whats, and all of that. And so if you can put yourself in the mindset of a wealthy person, right? Wealthy people, they are resourceful, they are knowledgeable, right? And so there is no reason why a vacant rental property should be vacant for an extended period of time. I think we all can agree that bricks and mortar don't pay rent, meaning that vacant rental property won't bring in any money. So if I have a tenant, if I have an applicant rather, because they haven't moved in, if I have an applicant who doesn't have money to pay the security deposit, I'm going to find resources for them to go and get the money that they need to move into my rental property, because that's just a good business practice. And so I go above and beyond to make sure my prospects have what they need so that they can move in at their anticipated move-in date. So at the point of them being approved, I already know, well, hey, Ms. Parker, thank you so much for your application at ABC Rental Property. We're excited that you want to live in our rental community. I'm going to ask them, what is your anticipated move-in date? They may say, oh, well, Karissa, I'm looking to move in December 1st. Okay, so it's November the 1st. Great. I'm going to provide them with a list of resources a month in advance. I'm going to provide them with multiple resources so that they can begin to work on places that can assist them with paying the security deposit when it's time to move in. Because if they don't have the money, they can't move in. I'm a businesswoman. I have a heart for the people. I think I'm one of the nicest landlords. Here or there might be a little tweaking that I could do, but I think I'm one of the nicest landlords in the land, right? I go above and beyond for my tenants and my prospects and applicants. But if they do not have the money to move in, then unfortunately they cannot move in. Because the worst thing that you can do is, as a landlord, put yourself in a situation where something happens, and because you have not done your job on the front end, it now bites you in the butt on the back end. So treat it like a business. Let me also speak to tenants in this subject here. If you're looking to move into a rental property, again, first of all, find out how much is the rent, how much is the security deposit. Start looking for places in advance that will pay the security deposit for you. There should be no reason why you can't move in. Some landlords will allow you to move in with a partial security deposit, and others will not. So you don't want to take a chance. Know, as a tenant, know what the criteria is. Ask questions up front so that you'll understand what that landlord need and expect out of you. All right. So thank you for that question that came in from YouTube. So again, I'm answering questions today. If you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the comment section. Any tenants, if you have questions pertaining to the landlord issues that you have, or you're trying to move into a rental property, let me answer all the questions today, because in the upcoming weeks, I'm going to do a series of topics that I know will be beneficial and helpful for you. All right. And so again, if this is your first time tuning in, let me say thank you so much. And also thank you for those of you who are watching the replay. All right. So let me go to another question that I have from YouTube. Okay, so the question here is, this is from a landlord. So the question is, I love my landlords. So the question here, this is a YouTube question. So the question is, Karissa, what do you do when you have tenants who are smoking marijuana in your rental property and you ask them to stop? Okay, this is something that we are faced with today. Marijuana is legal in a lot of places, but here's the thing. What some landlords and tenants don't know is this: if the tenant is in any type of housing program, I don't care if marijuana is legal, unless it is for medical purposes and they have a medical card, they cannot smoke in that rental property. Okay, so let me restate that. If the tenant is participating in any type of housing program, or if there is a medical purpose, that meaning that there's a medical card for that tenant to smoke marijuana, that would be an exception. But if they're in a housing program, they cannot do it. They cannot do it. Absolutely cannot. Even if it is legal. If it's legal, that's fine. But if they're in a housing program, they can't do it unless there is a medical purpose or need for smoking marijuana, weed, what have you. So that is a great question. Thank you so much for that question. All right, so let me go to a text message that I have here. All right, let me pull up my text messages. So I have a landlord who rented to a relative, and she does not have a lease. So she rented to a relative. She does not have a lease in Washington, D.C. So she wants to know how she can get them out. Well, I'm going to pause on this for a few seconds because that's how complicated this is going to be. In the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. is one of the most pro-tenant jurisdictions I have ever seen, experienced, work in, manage rental property in. Okay, so it's easy to allow people to move in Washington, D.C. It is hard to get them out in Washington, D.C. Why? Because D.C. is pro-tenant, meaning that laws are strongly in favor for tenants, not for landlords. And so I do apologize that you did not know that even renting to your relatives, you should have had a lease in place. You cannot just kick your relative out. If they have lived there, they have established residency there, and in many jurisdictions, this is the same situation. If they have established tenancy, you cannot kick them out. I don't care if it's your son, your daughter, your mama, your great grandmama. You cannot kick them out unless you provide them with the proper documentation, 30-day notice, 60-day notice, 90-day notice, whatever. But make sure that you have the correct forms when you're trying to evict them, when you're trying to take them to court. So contact a good landlord and tenant attorney who could assist you in this situation. But I do apologize. You cannot kick your relative out because you're not getting along. If that's your scenario, and you don't have a lease, you really shot yourself in the foot. I can't even stitch it up for you. You did yourself a great disservice. So once you get this relative out, please don't make that mistake again. Do not rent to a relative. Don't rent to an ex. Don't rent to a boyfriend, a girlfriend, mama, grandmother, in-law. Do not rent to anybody. I don't care how close you are. I don't care how much you love them. It is a business. Don't rent to anybody without a lease. I'm not saying that you have to be harsh or strong or mean, but treat it like a business, because you always want to think about worst case scenario. And I know that usually when you get your family and your loved ones to move in, you don't think about worst case scenario because you think that, okay, well, this is somebody that I know and love, and I know that they're going to take care of my property. Well, at the end of the day, they may be your relatives, but people are going to be people, and things happen to the best people. So I do apologize. I don't have any good news for you on that, but thank you so much for your question. All right, so Kamalita, I am coming to you here. How soon would security deposit assistance in DC be available to a tenant? Should the tenant seek it first before moving in? How would a landlord and tenant work that out? Great question. So, I would, at the point of approving the application, okay, so from the landlord's perspective, when I approve an application, I'm going to provide that applicant with a list of resources so that they can start looking for security deposit assistance. And here's why. There is so much money available in the community, but because of COVID, a lot of money has not moved. It's still in the pot. A lot of it has not been paid. The process has slowed down significantly. And so people, housing workers, case managers, they're not processing applications as quickly as they were when they were in the office. So I would say right away at the point of you deciding to accept the tenant if you are the landlord. All right. Should the tenant seek it first before moving in? Absolutely. The tenant should, but in the event that they don't, as a landlord, I would recommend landlords to start doing some research now. So in Washington, D.C., let me just tell you that DC ERAP, Energy Rental Assistance Program, has money available to assist. Catholic Charity, Salvation Army. Those are just some places that tenants can go to get assistance. I would also suggest that the tenant contact Housing Counseling Services. They're in Washington, D.C. Let me give you their number. That number is 202 667-7006. That is the number to Housing Counseling Services in Washington, D.C. They will assist with the security deposit, first month's rent. The Department of Human Services, DHS, also has money that is available. So great question. And the third and final question from you, Carmelita, is how would a landlord and tenant work that out? So I think I've answered that. So as a landlord, I would provide the resources. As a tenant, I would just go ahead and start working on it right away. As a matter of fact, I would schedule an appointment at the point of me looking at rental property to say, hey, listen, I know that the security deposit is going to be $2,400. Let me contact Housing Counseling Services today because they may not have an appointment available for a month later. So right away is always good. All right. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Okay, Miss Wilson. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so that's what this is for. I wanted to answer questions because I know that a lot of people, a lot of landlords have questions, a lot of tenants have questions, and that's what this segment is about. So I'll take a few questions, a few more questions if you have any pertaining to anything landlord and tenant related in the rental property. So Miss Townsend, you said, what factors should you consider when deciding whether to rent standard versus a housing program? That's a great question, Miss Townsend. I would suggest that you look at, here's one of the things that when I coach landlords, I have a landlord coaching program. One of the things that I always ask is, what type of tenant, what is your ideal tenant? What does that person look like? Where do they hang out? What do they do? What type of job do they have? So that's the first thing to ask. What type of tenant are you looking for? Because that would ultimately determine whether you should go with a market tenant or a housing program tenant. So let me just give you some pros and cons. All right. So we have experienced the biggest pandemic, the eviction moratorium. I think that this is the first pandemic that hit as significant as it has for many of us. Okay. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young either. But I can't remember there ever being a time in history where so many people were impacted, could not pay their rent, and landlords could not evict them. So let's just say we're hit by another pandemic. Okay. And you have a market tenant, they lose their job, they get sick, they have to take care of their mama, or the mama moves in and now they gotta, just try to make ends meet. If they cannot afford to pay the rent, and if you still have a mortgage that has to be paid, you still have taxes that has to be paid, who's going to pay the bills? So you have to look at, okay, if I get a market tenant, which you could, just make sure that they qualify and that they can afford the rent. If you get a market tenant, Make sure you vet them good. Make sure that it's the right person for your rental property. You can get a solid person. And if life happens, rent is still due. But if they don't have the money to pay the rent, then what are you going to do? You have to take them to court. Now, let me also address the housing assisted program type of tenant. If you get one of those tenants, same thing, vet them good, make sure you have the best tenant for that rental property. You'll always get money coming in. So sometimes I have this saying that he who pays attention. He who pays attention. Usually, in many cases, if you have a market tenant, they are paying the full contract rent. In many cases, they're going to take care of the rental property better than somebody who may not pay any rent at all because a program is paying it for them. And so, I mean, that's not a definite, but sometimes that is the case. And so it just depends on what type of tenant you want in your rental property. Do you want a market tenant? Do you want a working professional? And then also consider the neighborhood, consider the community. What type of tenant can you attract? Is your rental property in a good neighborhood? Is your rental property in a bad neighborhood? Don't answer that question for me, but I want you to answer that question for yourself. Look at the community, look at the neighborhood, and what type of tenant can you attract in that particular community? That's it. That's right. He who pays attention. Absolutely. I promise you that if they paying that full contract rent, $3,000 a month, $2,800 a month, $4,000 a month, baby, I promise you, they are not tearing up that rental property because they recognize, listen, I had to pay a security deposit. I want my money back. Right. So they usually take care of rentals, a lot better. But then I also have, I have market tenants and they just like, they could care less, right? Doesn't even matter if they're paying the full contract rent. But that's a great question. All right, so let me go to another text that just came in. If a tenant receives assistance for the security deposit needed to move in a property and moves out years later, does the tenant receive the security deposit back or does it go back to the agency that the assistance came from? That's a great question. Thank you so much for that question. Usually, if the tenant is getting assistance from the agency, I don't care if it's a year later, 5 years later, 25 years later, usually that security deposit goes back to the agency. But now here's the thing. Some landlords don't know it. Some landlords don't remember it. And some landlords will give that security deposit money to the tenant. All right. But that's a great question. Thank you for that. All right. So I am going to wrap up. I am so excited that you joined me today. This is what I do each and every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant coach. I believe in sharing information for landlords and tenants to help the entire rental community. I believe that sharing is caring. I promise you, as a landlord, it costs you absolutely nothing to show up to get this free information. But I promise you that if you violate any laws because of what you don't know, even if you don't know it, it can cost you thousands. So I thank you. My time is up. I thank you for yours. I hope that you all can join me next Monday right here on my Facebook or YouTube channel at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much, guys. I love and appreciate you all, and I hope to see you next week. So I'm going to say bye for now.